Hey everyone, welcome to Figure Drawing and Anatomy. This is a port prep course, so ideally this is for someone that might be applying to some college or university, such as Sheridan College, CalArts, RISD, or SVA. But really this is a wide-ranging course. A lot of classical art education uses figure drawing and anatomy in their curriculum, and so this course is really to prepare you to be a lot more proficient at drawing the human body and understanding all of the complex forms that you're seeing whenever you go to a figure drawing class. If you've never been to a figure drawing class, then this is a great place to start. We're starting off very, very basic with block-ins and just kind of figuring out the general structure and proportion of the human body, and then gradually layering on more complications each week. Or more complexity would be another way to put it. So I've been figure drawing for a long time. I started figure drawing when I was around 16, and I went to my first life drawing class. It's called Figure Drawing and Life Drawing are synonymous. I went to my first figure drawing class at a local art store in Guelph, Ontario, called Wyndham Art Supplies. And it was really nice. It's really nice to go to a figure drawing session with a little bit of instruction and a little bit of guidance for how to draw, because often you'll find that there's not enough time to draw all of the parts of the body and to get it accurately. There's a lot coming at you, and so, you know, for those who haven't gone, I think it's a lot easier in your brain to kind of conceptualize and imagine what it's going to be like than how it actually is. It's very difficult and it takes a long time to kind of get the hang of. So hopefully by the end of this course, you'll feel much more confident approaching figure drawing and whatever other use you might derive from figure drawing. So comic book art, figure painting, whatever kind of artistic practice you might have. I'm hoping this course will be a great complement to understanding the human body. So when I started at age 16 at that life drawing class, there's, you know, with figure drawing, there's such a wide range of sort of how people begin their figure drawing practice. Some go much more of the fine art interpretive route, which is more expressive and more about kind of talking about the different marks that you make on the paper and different theories to kind of how you approach drawing the body. And I will be doing more of an analytical sort of classical artistic education here, where we talk about kind of the underlying structures of the body, the rib cage, the hips, the rotation of different body parts, the head structure and its attachment to the neck, how our arms and legs attach into the torso, things like that. It's almost kind of, I like to think of it like thinking of the human body as a machine that's sort of built and constructed. So we're gonna be analyzing the human body and kind of figuring how to pull it apart and put it back together, I guess you could say, in drawn form. So this course is especially relevant for those interested in animation, illustration, or fine art. That's sort of the general umbrella that this course will cover. So when I first started drawing figures, I felt very intimidated, and I was just kind of trying to draw around the figures, contour drawing it's called, when you're kind of trying to get the contour line that encompasses the figure. But we really want to look both through and around the human body. So we're looking at some of these forms you might not even see when you look at the model at a figure drawing class, but you can imagine them and kind of input these underlying structures that we have in our body onto any figure once you understand the proper relationships of each piece of the body to each other. So first, I want to show you one of my favorite figure drawing books, and also one of the books that I started with. This was recommended by my first drawing teacher, and then I later found out that Norman Rockwell had this man as his teacher when he was studying in school. So pretty neat, and it's nice to know that you're in good company, because Norman Rockwell is a great figure artist. So this man is named George Bridgman. So George B. Bridgman, right there. This is a very, very common place to start for life drawing. The drawings in this book are very expressive, and kind of like I mentioned a minute ago, they're very much in the spirit of taking a body and kind of imagining it as a machine that's constructed and built, and kind of understanding how all the different curves and planes that, and the harmony of a human body and how it all fits together. And he does a really great job of breaking those forms down into simplified shapes. Lots of cubes, cylinders, cones. You'll see all kinds of kind of very almost primitive shapes that build up the human body in this book. And so when I was first learning to draw life drawing, I was told to kind of just draw the sketches of George Bridgman kind of on a rinse and repeat kind of cycle. So just continue the practice of moving your way throughout this large textbook and kind of drawing each of these drawings and kind of feeling out how he builds the human form. And it'll help to kind of infuse your own drawing. So I do recommend, if possible, to do a little warm-up. Draw from this textbook or other textbooks first before you begin each of the lessons throughout this course. Every week I'm going to give you some homework and some practices and exercises to do, and you're going to complete that for our next week's meetup. So that's kind of the idea of this and all of our other courses. So that's kind of the idea of this and all of our other courses, is that you start with a video lesson each week, and then we meet up the following week. Now, if you're taking the intro version of this course, you will just have the video content. You're left to your own devices to do it. But I do encourage you to do these warm-ups as well as all the exercises throughout the course as much as possible. The more that you put into this course, the more you're going to get out of it. So I hope you're excited to get started. So there's so many materials that you can draw your figures with in this class. But here are some of the most common ones. Obviously a pencil is probably the most common, what most of you have used to do figure drawing before. I do recommend using a darker pencil, something that has a little bit more shading potential. I'm holding a 7B Staedtler pencil right now. So that's very dark. Something like that would be good. Or even a Conte or charcoal pencil is a great idea too. This is a blender. We're actually not going to be doing a whole lot of shading in this class, only a little bit for the longer poses. But some people love using these. I personally like the blending that I get just from a normal piece of Conte or charcoal. If I was using something softer like charcoal, I might use a blender a little bit more. But generally I don't use them all the time. This is Conte. So Conte is sort of, it's sort of a newer version of charcoal. Charcoal is very dirty and it kind of gets everywhere. If I were to kind of rub charcoal on my finger, this would get my finger completely black. But Conte is a compressed charcoal, so it has a waxy kind of outer coating that has to be worn down before you can kind of just draw freely. And it's just much cleaner and much easier to control overall. So this is maybe a funny choice, but I actually love drawing gestures with a chisel tip Sharpie marker. I like the variety that it gives you with the chisel. You get kind of one sharp side and then one, you can turn it and then you get the flatter edge. I've actually, especially with gestures, I really love doing Sharpie gestures for my figures. Now, if you are a student that is applying to a college or university, I know that they can be sometimes a little bit more particular with what mediums they want to see their drawings in. I know from my past experience at Sheridan College in animation that we were encouraged to use Conte. Conte was sort of the medium of choice of that college. So just do your research, do your homework, and find out what is the sort of primary medium, or look at other portfolios that have been successful in that program and see how they're drawing. That'll give you an indication as to kind of what medium to use. But for most of this class, I'll be using Conte. I love it, and it comes in a stick or pencil form. I often just use the stick form because I'm used to animation life drawing where the goal is sort of speed. If you're applying to illustration, that's more about the exploration of the medium and rendering of the pose. So you typically do much longer lengths of poses. So you might do a drawing for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, whereas in animation it's usually between 1 and 15 minutes or so, somewhere around there. Okay, if you are going to go this route and use a Conte stick, when you first buy it, it'll have sort of a square top. It's not rounded off at all. And the first thing you want to do is wear it down a whole bunch. If you have a scrap piece of paper, that's ideal, but you want to wear this down just on your pad of drawing, on your newsprint pad. Wear it down a whole bunch, because once you do this a lot, I know it feels weird because you're kind of just using up, you're just using the brand new material you just got. And I'm kind of turning this a little bit as I do it. So as I do this, I'm kind of turning the Conte stick a little bit so that I get a little bit more than just one edge. I'm trying to wear down a whole bunch of this. Okay, I'm getting there. It takes a little while to wear it down at a good level. So over time, you're going to wear it down a fair bit so that you can kind of have a nice side edge. And that's going to allow you to get softer strokes. So the idea is once you've worn it down a fair bit, you can get softer strokes. Because the problem is if you're just using the, if you're just using it straight out of the box, aka this side, you know, it only kind of does fine. You can get some softer strokes, but then if you turn it, you immediately get these sharp strokes. It's just a little bit harder to control when you just have the square top. But once you wear it down, I haven't even worn this down too much, but already I can get these nice soft strokes. And then also, so I'm making a soft stroke, and then I can turn it gradually and get a nice thinner stroke there as well. So it just has a lot of flexibility that I really like. So you get, as you're kind of rendering forms, you can have a diversity of stroke, and you can also press to darken either of these, whether it's a thin stroke or a thick stroke. You can get a darker edge to it. So over time, you can have a lot of control with your drawings. And that'll give you a nice range of flexibility in terms of how you render it, especially in a short time frame when you don't have all of the time to spend on precisely mapping out everything and rendering it as if you were in a longer, more sustained figure drawing session. So here's a leg. I'm just drawing the knee being right here. Yeah. So you can use those strokes to your benefit. That's the idea. But make sure you do wear it down a fair bit. Ideally, over time, you might even get a point. You're going to get kind of something that looks like that. That's fine. I personally, it's tricky because you need to constantly wear that down too, because that can be an uncontrollable little thing too when you get a point. My favorite version of Conte, I guess, is when there's a nice long edge that's worn down. Actually, it'd be more like that. Okay, so when one edge is worn down, then you can use that flat edge to get those nice soft strokes. Here it is. Yeah, those are the strokes you want. Okay, now, the next thing that we would do in life drawing, especially early on to warm up your arm a little bit, because this is another thing with using Conte is, you know, you're not just drawing, when you're used to drawing with pencil, most of the time you're kind of drawing like this. You're using your wrist. Mostly it's just your wrist moving. Now with drawing the figure with a Conte stick like this, you're ideally holding it kind of like this so that you can hold the stick and move your whole arm to make strokes. You want to get into this motion so you're drawing kind of with your shoulder rather than just with your wrist. It's going to give you a lot more expressive quality to your drawings and you're drawing with your whole arm. This would be different if I was doing something very, very hyper rendered with very fine details. I might, you know, switch to using my wrist more. But when we're trying to get a gesture in particular, you really want to make sure that you're using your whole arm. Okay, so a nice little warm-up, aside from the drawing from an anatomy book or a Bridgman book, like I mentioned earlier, is to draw as best as you can perfect circles in a row. And once you've done one row, then switch direction. This kind of warms up your hand-eye coordination. It gets your brain thinking. Oh, there's a bad one. and kind of processing. So this is one, is doing the circles from either direction. Now try to draw as straight lines as you can, and then reverse direction. Now diagonal. Now reverse direction. Other diagonal. Reverse direction. And then you can do this over again. So often when I would go to extra life drawing sessions, which was provided by Sheridan, thankfully, when I was in school, whenever I'd come into a class with all of the students ready to draw, I would always see everyone making these circles all over their page, their whole page filled with these circles. This is why we use newsprint too, which is one of the cheaper forms of paper that we can use, because it's really just, it is the cheapest kind of form to draw on, aside from anything that you might find like cardboard. But it also has a nice surface. And I'm using smooth newsprint as well, which I like. I recommend it. So yeah, you can keep doing these exercises to kind of warm up your arm, your hand-eye coordination each week. That's a great way to start. Okay, now that we're warmed up, we're going to dive right into gesture drawing. So gesture drawing is typically very, very short poses as almost like a second warm-up. That warm-up was just kind of to get our arm moving. Now we're going to actually be drawing from the model, but they're still going to be fairly reduced poses in terms of the length of time. So now gestures mean different things to different people. So if you were a fine artist or illustrator, a gesture might be, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, even half an hour. An animator, a gesture might be from 30 seconds to 2 minutes, somewhere in there. So we're going to do a range of poses today, starting with 1 minute and going all the way up to 10 minutes. And with the nice thing about gestures is that you can do so many of them. They're very quick, and there's a reason we're drawing on newsprint. These are not going to be your most beautiful drawings. They will not be your magnum opus. These are just sort of communicative drawings to kind of express what is happening in the pose and to try and get down what you see in front of you as best as you can on paper. It's going to be a very, very simplified version of what that model actually looks like. They might not look like anyone at all. It might just look like a kind of wireframe human being. Again, the goal of this is not prettiness. It is not to get the most beautiful drawing. It's just to kind of get a sense of what that pose is doing. And the nice thing about learning gestures, other than just warming up and kind of loosening up a little bit, is that it's a great, if you get good at gesture drawing, when you do the longer drawings, it's much easier to dive into that and to time yourself appropriately, because you might still be able to get the gesture of a 30-minute pose in 1 minute, and then that gives you 29 more minutes to kind of refine that drawing. Whereas some people that are slower or not used to developing their aptitude for gestures, they might take 10 minutes to roughen the pose and then start. So again, this is going to be very light, very rough. The lighter that you're drawing, typically the better. If you have a little extra time in the 2s, 3s, or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you might be able to refine your lines a little bit and actually get a nice drawing. But again, that's not really the goal of this. The goal of this is to just get that pose down on paper. Now, this might be intimidating for you if you've never done life drawing before, but the nice thing is, once you see what I'm asking for in terms of what you want to get in a gesture, I think you'll be pretty relaxed. It's not too complicated. If you've drawn stick people before, probably you're going to be able to do this. And I'm also going to give those that have done some figure drawing before some extra steps to take to increase their skills once they've got the basic blocking down. Okay? So let's get started. So every pose is going to be different in terms of your starting approach here, but I'm going to get you the most quick kind of general block in. This mostly works for a pose that's standing, but for gestures, usually the model's doing standing poses. So let's dig right in. So in this pose, this is kind of a nice standing pose. Nothing too excited. You know, it's just a standing figure. There's some things nice going on in the hips and the shoulders. So definitely really look at your pose when you're just starting and notice these things. But as we do these exercises, you're going to notice more and more. So the first thing that I typically try and do is to get the general line of action. In this pose, this isn't really, you know, the line of action isn't going to really say a whole lot about what the pose is doing, but I'm using that angle of my conte that I've worn down a lot. I'm using that now. I'm getting a nice soft first line in that just gets the general sense of the pose very, very lightly, right? So it's not, you know, nothing too strong yet. It's nicer to begin with the general motion of the pose than to dive into something specific. At least this breaks that white canvas syndrome of us just kind of feeling stuck. So again, because this pose is just standing, not a whole lot going on that I could say in terms of line of action, this will be more useful in a more excited kind of pose. Okay, so from here, the next thing I might do, so I really like working with the torso first. I find when you work with the torso, you have less room for error than if you start with either the feet or the head or the arms. The torso, since everything connects to it, it's kind of the center of the pose. So I like to think of it first. So for me, I'm going to, before I map out that torso exactly, I'm going to get the angle of the shoulders, which, you know, they're pretty in line. It's maybe a slight angle downward. So again, using my conte very lightly here. And then the hips. So the hips are actually kind of going down at a slight pose there, since the one leg is kind of, her left leg is holding up the pose and her right leg is kind of more relaxed. So slight angle there. But now, so notice how this is going to be the top of the torso, this is going to be the bottom of the torso. So I give myself plenty of room, but I also haven't drawn too small. I'm using the paper. I have plenty of room still to develop the legs and the head. So it's yeah, it's a good starting point. Nothing too blocked in, but I know that I have enough space for the whole thing. Early on, if you're having trouble fitting them on your newsprint, you might even start by putting kind of a maximum where you can imagine the top of the head all the way down to the feet at the bottom. Okay, so again, that's just my maximum. So within that, I don't think I'm even going to get that far with this particular pose. Okay, so now I want to look at the general shape of the torso. And the torso, mostly what can, there's two main pieces to the torso. There's the hips and the rib cage. So the rib cage, so this is kind of a 3/4 angle pose. So I'm going to try to get the rib cage. Now the rib cage from the front view, it's kind of like a big egg, right? And then it has a big U in the middle. Same with the back. So this is the middle, and then kind of comes down. So the sides, it comes down a lot more on the sides than in the middle. And then the hips kind of do this. Something like that. So from there, the legs connect to there and then come down. So if you notice, you can test this on yourself, but if you're standing, and I'm standing, I don't always stand for doing life drawing, but I do like standing when possible. Again, it allows me to free up my arm and use my whole arm. So I find it useful for that. But there's not actually a whole lot of distance between the bottom of the rib cage and the top of the hips. So just notice that when you're laying in these basic forms. So I'm gonna dive right in. So she's got a fairly upright chest here. So I'm gonna oops, I drew with the wrong side of my conte there. I'm gonna draw the rib cage in. Okay. Something like this. Okay, great. And now the hips. So the nice thing about working with a model that's fairly fit with low body fat is that I can see the top of the hips very easily. I can see them right there. And then again, remember it's kind of like a bucket in the middle. and then going across, and then something like this. So if you deviate from these initial angles, which I'm not so far, but if you are, then that's totally fine. You can totally overwrite each thing that you add on to the pose as you're going. So don't worry too much about, if the angle's not perfect. If you need to change it as you go, for sure. Okay, so this is kind of the pelvic bowl. Okay, so now we can kind of create the rest of that torso. Okay, that's kind of what I'm seeing. So again, we've got this 3/4 angle here. Great. Can I have the chest? Okay, great. And now, lastly, I might add the collarbones in. So the collarbones go to the middle line, and they kind of come out like this, like an upside down V. Okay, so we've got the hips, the rib cage roughed in, the chest, the collarbones. So that gives us a pretty good foundation of the direction of the pose that we're seeing. Okay, so the next thing is, for if you're just doing a 1-minute pose, which is what we're going to start with, you might not get this much detail. This might be more what you try to get for a 2-minute pose, where there's a little bit more time. But if you want to get a simplified version of this, even just starting with kind of like drawing a kidney bean is a good approach, actually. So for this, usually there's one side that's pinched and one side that's stretched. It really depends on the pose, though. A good pose will have something like this. And then a midline would be great to draw. So that's kind of the simplified version of this pose. It's just a kidney bean, okay? So from here, I might draw a straight line down where the leg is, and then try and catch some of that hyperextension of the lower leg there, and then even the foot down there. Now this leg is a little lower. It starts a little lower, so this socket is up here, and this one's kind of down at an angle, so it's kind of coming down here. So there, that's not a bad place to start. And again, I'm just going to draw kind of a big triangle for the foot. So that allows me to kind of see approximately what's happening in the pose. So now I'm going to draw the same thing with the arm. So it's coming out, it's coming down here, hands coming in a little bit. I might draw a very, very rough hand to begin with. And then this arm, so this arm's mostly behind this form, so it's going to kind of go through a part of it, at least to begin with. Here. Okay. So great. Now the last thing is the neck and the head. It's fairly upright neck, actually. Very straight. And then the head, when I'm drawing the head, I usually draw an oval at the front and then an oval of depth. Almost the same approximate volume. So from the side view, the head might look like this, and then I draw the nose, ear, eyes, etc. From the front view, this is mostly just going to be the one oval. From a 3/4 view, it's kind of it's again 2 ovals, but the one is foreshortened, so you only see a little bit of it, not the whole depth of the back of the head. And the neck would be coming down somewhere around there. Okay, so from this point of view, she's tilting her head forward a little bit. I want to try to capture that. So here's one oval. Here's the other oval. And then the neck kind of coming down through there. Okay. So in your first 1 minute, if you even just got this kidney bean shape of the torso and mapped out approximately where these legs are, and especially with the legs looking at the angle of the one foot planted to the other foot, that's a critical angle to consider. And you get the arms kind of positioned and a little bit of a head drawn in, little bonus points if you get some neck connection to the torso, then that's a great place to start. This is a totally fine gesture. It expresses what the pose is doing. Now, obviously, there's a lot more details in this drawing that I want to include, But first I want to mention just that one thing to consider is that from the top of the head, so these are some general proportion guidelines. Again, very, very general. But the top of the head to the bottom to where the crotch is, so somewhere in here, that is approximately halfway through the pose. So that distance to the bottom of the feet, that pubic bone is about half the distance. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're drawing. Another thing is that generally the upper arm and the lower arm, not including the hand, is approximately the same distance. So the upper arm to here, to the elbow, and the elbow to the wrist. And then same thing with the leg. From the joint, now the leg actually begins higher than probably you think it does. Actually, it's probably more like here in this pose. This distance to the knee is very similar in distance from the knee to the ankle. So really nice how our bodies do that for us. It makes it a little bit easier to draw. So again, for your 1 minute, just aim for getting the torso shape very generally. If you want to draw a little rib cage in there, that would be great, but not entirely necessary. Just try to get the general shape of the torso, and then just lines, just a stick figure of the rest of the pose. And if you want, you can, if there's a fist, you might draw a ball. You might try to draw a little short hand gesture, but that's about it. And the feet, I'm kind of just drawing a big flat piece at the bottom, and then kind of come up to where the ankle is. Bonus points for getting a little ankle bone, and then the heel. That's all that I'm really drawing of the foot. So really, really basic, just really starting with stick people. Now for those that want to take this a step further, the next steps would be to, well, now that we've got it mapped out, you know probably what the next step is to outline and to actually fill in some of the details of this pose. So try to get as many of these features as you can. So there's the iliac crest here. So that's that top of the hip that you can see very prominently on this model. And then there's the front leg muscle. And then there's the knee. So I'm making sure that each piece feels distinct. This isn't all just one big shape like that. These are each distinct pieces. You want the bones to feel distinct from the muscles and the tendons to feel distinct from the bones, etc. So the hip bone, the crotch, this thigh muscle, the knee that I'm overemphasizing because I'm trying to communicate the structure of this form, even if it's a little bit exaggerated from what it would typically be like. And then, so this leg is very hyperextended, so it almost seems like it's bending back a little bit. Keep turning my Conte to the non-worked down side, which happens a lot. Okay, so now I'm gonna get the butt. And typically at the back of the leg, when the leg is really working and this muscle's firing, a muscle firing is when it's in use. That's what I mean by that term. This straight line here, this is often created when the hamstring is kind of holding tight. So it's holding the body and this leg in place. Okay, so I'm actually going to extend the foot back a little bit. Okay, great. So I've got approximately that leg. Now this hip is bending over here, right? So we can kind of see the other side a little bit, but very quickly the stomach comes in as well. And then it flattens out. And then it picks up again where there's the rib cage coming out, like that. So now with this piece, this leg comes out lower than the other leg. So something like that. And then actually, this angle's a little off, so I'm going to correct that now. I might draw the big toe. And ankle at the bottom. And then make sure, in this case, this line overlaps the bottom line. This line overlaps the lower leg there. That's actually quite important for having a convincing structure there. So I think my foot's a little bit too big. I'm just going to reduce that a little bit here. I don't like to erase very much because I really like to feel my mistakes. When I do make them, it's nice to Okay, so now this upper arm, just gonna fill this in fairly quickly. So generally the upper arm tapers towards the wrist, just like the lower leg. Okay, so now here, this shoulder comes up a little bit. Okay, great. Now, I think I'm going to enlarge my head size a little bit. And I might also throw in a quick nose, just even the shadow underneath the nose, and an eye socket, which I typically just kind of shade in. Sometimes I'll throw in the mouth, the other eye socket, and even a little bit of hair. Might get the thumb in, and kind of the fist of the hand. And if you want, you can, if you have time, which you probably don't in a gesture, you can get the actual prop itself in. Which I need to change the angle of, have it rest on the... Okay, great. So I might not emphasize that line so much. That would be a little slimmer. Great. So that's a good gesture. This is probably more of a 5 to a 10 minute kind of pose. Obviously, I've taken a lot more time, but I'm also demonstrating this. So these are the general kind of considerations that I would have, is kind of just slowly building it out. But if you even just get the axis points, again, if you've not life drawn at all, just work on getting those placed correctly first. Try to get the right angles for each of those limbs. And then if you have extra time, try your best to fill in those limbs to the best ability you can. Okay, so for our first week, this is more than finished, really. Again, I just want to get the basic gesture, that block in, really, really simply. If I could see a whole bunch of these great block-ins for the meetup, for those that are doing the class meetup, this would be great. This is a great place to be, right? And then just an approximate head, maybe a little neck. Great, excellent. That's what we want to focus on for this week. So just getting those basic shapes laid in. No shading, no nothing, just focusing strictly on form and getting the most accurate kind of drawing that we possibly can. Okay, great. I'll do a few more to demonstrate and then you can start. I'm going to do another gesture here. Now I'm going to sit. We'll see how this goes. So again, I'm going to start with the torso, just doing my best to kind of see what the pose is doing. Actually, sorry, we're starting with the line of action first. So with this one, there's actually kind of a nice S-curve created here by the fact that he's kind of putting that 1 foot out. So the line of action just gives us kind of a scaffold to build the rest of the pose on top of, okay? So line of action first, just to get the general sense of that pose. Now I'm going to build the torso a little bit. Thinking very, very approximately, kind of considering that kidney bean shape that I kind of told you about before. So it's going to be something like this. It's actually kind of similar to the last one. Okay, so now after that, I'm just going to re-emphasize that shoulder angle and the hip angle. And from here, now I can begin creating those axis points from the arm. And so notice that this is very foreshortened. So this arm is going to appear very short, but it's just going back into space. So one thing that I talk a lot about, especially when I'm going to be reviewing your works, is the x-axis versus the y-axis versus the z-axis. So everyone pretty much understands x and y. You know, if I say, maybe this arm is too far out in the x-axis. That might mean, you need to shorten up the amount of space it exists in horizontally. If this one went way up here, I would say that's too high in the y-axis. You got to bring that down. But Z is an interesting one to consider. Z is depth. So the reason that this works and we can have this be so short is because it's heading further back in the Z axis, in the going away from the camera, okay? And that's generally the principle of foreshortening. Okay, so let's keep going here. Gonna get that midline in, the rib cage, now the leg. Now, it looks to me like this leg is taking the bulk of the weight. So I'm gonna move that down first. Something maybe like that. And then this leg is obviously kind of coming out a little bit. It's a bit of a curve there at the end too. Now this shape of foot is not the same. It's not the same kind of pizza slice. This is a very different shape of foot there. So that's my general shorthand for drawing that. Now I'm just going to get the head in very, very lightly and very approximately. Something like this. Okay, great. Get the eyes in. Awesome. So again, a simplified version of that head would be just the two ovals. Remember, that's a good starting point to just draw that and then draw the neck kind of coming out of that. And if you have a little extra time, draw a little ear shape, just like I'm going to do here, and even a little eye shape. From this back 3/4 view of the head, you can draw a nice easy eye there, just like that. Okay? This might need a little more thickness on the neck. Okay. So again, this is a fine place to stop here, especially for 1 minute. If you can get all this in 1 minute, that's great. That's a good place to start for those ones. As you get into 2s and 3s and you want to add more detail, I'll start that process. So, okay, I'll start here. Where you start, there's no right place. It's up to you and how you're kind of flowing with that pose naturally. Now I'm going to try to get some of the shapes of his arms. Noticing that the arm tapers as it goes down to the wrist. And then the back here, so the back muscle overlaps the arm there. It overlaps on top of it and then kind of almost connects with the shoulder. Then this back kind of comes in here. And then we've got a strong oblique muscle here as well. And on the other side as well, that oblique is visible, so I can see that. So we're going to talk, don't worry about anatomy, I'm kind of talking about it now, but we're going to get much deeper into it as we go throughout this course. The obliques are just these ones at the side. And then the other strong lat muscle here. And then you can kind of see a bit of an edge of the shoulder blade. So you want to draw that in too. I'm simplifying a little bit from what you see there, but there's some tricks for drawing the shoulder blade too. So as the arm reaches forward, as this one is, that shoulder blade is going to go further in this direction. But as this arm comes back, as if it's pulling something, it's going to move closer to the middle. So the shoulder blade is often moving either closer to the middle or further from that point. So think about what the arm is doing and the shoulder blade will be acting accordingly. So the the trapezius muscle up here, it's kind of a big one that looks like that. It overlaps the back of the neck here. It's going to overlap that muscle, and actually it continues up into the neck there. So this is probably too much detail for a gesture, but just to kind of let you know what, yeah, so as I thought, this arm is too long. I'm going to bring this a little closer. No problem. Just a gesture. Things are going to be wrong all the time. Okay, and then that fish shape, something like this. Again, very approximate. So I usually like to actually use a softer line until I'm very committed. So there's a lot more shapes to draw, you'll notice, when you have a very muscled figure. Okay. Okay, so again, I'm using my Conte, the thick and thin, and pressing at different, I'm pressing at different amounts depending on the emphasis I want to create. And I remember when I'm doing this, that I've been drawing for many, many years. So absolutely do not feel intimidated with where you are. This is a long process and an 8-week course. So you have plenty of time to improve. This is just kind of, I'm just showing you what a gesture could look like. Obviously I'm taking my time with this. This is probably closer to, I don't know, a 10-minute even pose. So not, again, we're kind of leaving the realm of gesture. But again, this is the general shape of the pose that I'm seeing there. I could also, let's see, where's that hand? Somewhere around there. So I could also kind of try and get that shape in there that he's holding. It's nice to have a prop actually. Okay, so again, I've got some interior lines. I've got the midline. I didn't draw the hip too much. I did draw the iliac crest, which is part of the hip, and then same thing on the other side. I got the rib cage in, and gradually I kind of looked around, was trying to tease out some of those muscles, but I've really simplified a lot of these forms. I'm doing just kind of the general shapes so that I'm not fussing too much. But yours will probably look even more general than this. There's a lot of subtleties of musculature that I've added here that you absolutely do not have to add. Again, this is just for that very extended gesture kind of approach. Okay, great. We'll do one more. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this gesture fairly quickly without saying anything, because whenever I'm doing a demonstration and explaining a pose, it always takes me a lot more time than if I were to just do it quickly. So I'm going to do this gesture sort of using as much as I can. Now also, I'll mention that I want to try a seated pose to show you how I would interpret this. There's a lot of ways to do a seated pose. So the line of action I don't find is as useful for a pose like this because it's kind of all over the place. So I usually just start in with the torso. But anyways, this is all I'll say before I kind of just dive into it. And you'll notice that I might do things out of order according to the process that I've been explaining, where you start with the torso and then do the angles and then the axis points. I'll try to stick to it as much as possible, but I also kind of, I don't want any of you to kind of be stuck feeling like you're confined to this formula. This is a way to approach gestures, but you absolutely don't need to feel confined to this. If you have, if you want to try something, or you break the steps down a little bit, so you maybe do this first, do that first, you play with it. It doesn't have to be so strict. This is just to help those that haven't done any figure drawing before and want some kind of structured formula, but you absolutely can just kind of flow with what you're seeing and just go. So anyways, that's all I'll say before I get started here. Okay, so this is most of the pose. So that's probably a minute or two, probably closer to 2 minutes. So yeah, I got a decent amount of detail, but it's still fairly rough. I did a little bit of access points, but then I kind of just drove right into it because I want to try to do it faster. If I had a little more time, I might have added that sword in. And it's always nice in this kind of case to draw a little bit of the prop, because otherwise you just kind of have a floating character. Yeah, see that leg isn't even, it's probably more like that. But yeah, it's nice to have just a little bit of the prop so that things aren't just floating on other things. A little bit easier to work with. So yeah, this is kind of what my gesture would look like. So the feet are very simple, just very proximate. I tried to get a little simple gesture of the hand in really quickly, but it's really, really basic. I got the little emphasis here. I should have added the collarbones. That'd be another thing. And maybe a little bit more hair detail. But I got the tilt of the head. I wanted to kind of get that. There's a slight head tilt to the right. I exaggerated it a little bit. But overall, you can see everything. Some things are a little loose, like that arm. But the pose is there. I got the rib cage in, the pelvis a little bit. You can't see too much of, but yeah. So that's my gesture for a seated pose. That's around 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, great. Okay, so that's our gesture drawing class for today. So now you're going to get started on some gestures and using as much as what you've learned today as you can. After a point, it's kind of hard to kind of stuff all this stuff in your brain and then just get started. So if you, again, like I said in that last gesture, if you deviate from the formula or some of the formulas that I've given you today, a step-by-step kind of instructions, that's absolutely okay. That's fine. Just remember that if you ever get lost and you're kind of stuck and you don't really know what to do, go back to that structure. Go back to that step-by-step process that I gave you, okay? So depending on your skill level, you may or may not find those steps helpful, but it is a great kind of synthesized way of getting through a quick gesture in a fairly efficient way. But it's still, again, if you're just beginning, it's going to take some getting used to for sure. Okay, so our homework today is going to be 10 1-minute poses, 10 3-minute poses, and 4 5-minute poses. Okay, so this gives us a nice range of short gestures. So we're not getting too long. Your longest pose is going to be a 5-minute, but do start with the ones, because you'll notice that as you get into those ones, when you do the 3s, you feel like you'll have so much more time, and hopefully you'll get a lot more out of those poses. So it's a great way to go. Okay, so from these poses, if you're doing the basic or full versions of this class, you're going to just pick your top 5 if you're in the group class. And if you're in the full class, just one-on-one, then you can give me a whole bunch of your poses and we'll get through as many of them as we can in 1 hour, okay? So, but for the basic folks, just 5 poses would be a good place to start. It could be any variety of these, but ideally a few of each, or you know, one or two of each of those, okay? So that would be a good place to start. All right, well, good luck. I hope you're excited, and let's begin life drawing.